I recently revisited Hammer's sixth Dracula movie starring Christopher Lee, Dracula A.D. 1972. It's a unique take on the iconic vampire tale with a trip back to the groovy 70s with a bloody twist. The film opens in London's Hyde Park in the year 1872, and no messing about, we see Dracula and Lawrence Van Helsing battle on top of a runaway coach. Dracula throws Van Helsing from the coach, but the coach crashes and Dracula is impaled by a broken wheel. Van Helsing takes the broken wheel and pushes it fully into Dracula's chest, killing the Count once more. Soon after, Van Helsing dies, then we see a man dressed in black collect Dracula's remains. A few days later, at the funeral of Van Helsing, the man buries Dracula's remains near Van Helsing's grave. And then boom! The film is suddenly set against the backdrop of London's groovy scene. The film boldly catapults Count Dracula into the funky 70s. I think that the juxtaposition of ancient evil in a contemporary setting is both daring and refreshing. As always, Christopher Lee shines as the iconic vampire. Even with little screen time, he had much more to do in the previous film, Scars of Dracula. He actually gets to say a line from Stoker's novel this time around.
You would play your brains against mine, against me who has commanded nations.
If my memory is correct, this could have possibly been the second time I saw Christopher Lee as Count Dracula. My first Hammer horror film was Dracula Prince of Darkness, so I hold Dracula A.D. and Christopher Lee as Dracula close to my heart. This film really sort of expanded my love for Hammer horror. Now, one of the best things about Dracula A.D. 1972 is the return of Peter Cushing as Van Helsing. Van Helsing has been absent from the Christopher Lee Dracula series of movies since 1958. In the opening of the film, he plays Lawrence Van Helsing, and later on he plays a descendant of Lawrence Van Helsing named Lorimer Van Helsing. I always thought that the version of Van Helsing from 1872 was the same as the original Van Helsing from the first Dracula movie from 1958. But that can't be possible, because the first film takes place in the year 1885. Now, I know I'm thinking way too much into this, but I'm just glad to see Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in their iconic roles once again. Cushing doesn't even seem like a different Van Helsing this time around. He still plays it off exactly the same as he did in 1958, telling other people about the legend of the vampire and how to destroy them. The supporting cast in Dracula A.D. 1972 are much better than what we've seen in previous installments. In fact, I think the main supporting cast members are the best we've seen since Dracula has risen from the grave, and possibly since Patrick Troughton's portrayal as Clove in Scars of Dracula. The two main supporting cast members that stand out are Stephine Beacham, who plays Jessica Van Helsing, the granddaughter of Lorimer Van Helsing, and Christopher Neme, who plays Johnny Alucard. Johnny in particular is like another rendition of the character Lord Courtly, played by Ralph Bates in Taste the Blood of Dracula. He's into black magic and is responsible for the resurrection of Count Dracula. In fact, the resurrection scene kind of plays out the same as Taste the Blood of Dracula, only this time we have the fortune of seeing James Bond actress and model Caroline Munro, who plays Laura. Johnny invites his so-called friends to an abandoned church and has them listen to an incantation on a tape recorder. He calls out Jessica, but she refuses, so Laura offers herself to take part. She lays on an altar as Johnny pours in Dracula's remains into a goblet and cuts his hand, and bleeds into the goblet. From there, everything goes wrong. For Laura, anyway. Afterwards, Dracula is summoned and feeds on his first victim, who unfortunately happens to be Laura. But how did Johnny Alucard get Dracula's remains? Well, as it turns out, Johnny is a descendant of the man dressed in black who collects the remains of Dracula in 1872. It still doesn't quite add up how Johnny got Dracula's remains, but I guess the film is all about family and descendants. There's even a scene where Lorimer Van Helsing writes down Johnny's last name, only to find out it's Dracula spelled backwards. This theme was also used in the 1943 film Son of Dracula. Another recurring theme in this film is the use of running water. The last time this was used was in Dracula Prince of Darkness from 1966, where Dracula met his demise. Now, what I think sets Dracula A.D. 1972 apart is its stylistic choices. The film fully embraces the psychedelic aesthetics of the era, from the vibrant fashion to the killer soundtrack. While some may find it over the top, I appreciated the boldness in breathing new life into a classic story. The cinematography is a mix of gothic horror and 70s flair. The contrast between the eerie vampire elements and the vibrant colours of the era creates a visually striking experience. It's a feast for the eyes, and the effects add a nostalgic charm. While the film's unique approach will resonate with some, it may not be everyone's cup of blood. The pacing might feel uneven, and the stylistic choices could be polarizing. If you're a purist for traditional vampire lore, this might not be your coffin of choice. This is the first Dracula movie where the score was not composed by James Bernard. Instead, the score is composed by Mike Vickers, and for what it's worth, it's pretty good. The funky 70s music lives in my head rent-free, and it's so catchy. The more traditional Hammer music, the more gothic instrumentals are still there, and they still sound great. The film also features an appearance by the band Stoneground. As always, I mention the death of Dracula in each of these reviews. The build-up to this death is quite lengthy. Dracula's death in this movie is pretty basic, but not dull in the slightest. Before the climax of the movie, Lorimer is seen setting traps for Dracula at the old abandoned church where the Count was resurrected. Dracula has Jessica under his control and is about to make her one of his own when he's interrupted by Van Helsing, as he tells Dracula to look on him and remember. This begins a chase between Dracula and Van Helsing. On the balcony, Dracula is stabbed with a silver knife and falls below, but Jessica is still under his control. She removes it, and the chase continues. When outside, Van Helsing trips, and Dracula sees the traps that were set for him. But what Dracula didn't see coming was the holy water which Van Helsing threw over the Count. This causes him to trip and fall onto the wooden stakes which Van Helsing had placed. Van Helsing takes a shovel and impales Dracula further onto the stakes, and this frees Jessica from her curse, as she witnessed all of this and screams. Once again, Dracula dissolves into dust, leaving only his ring behind. In conclusion, Dracula AD 1972 is a groovy departure from the norm, offering a fresh take on a timeless tale. Whether you're a horror aficionado or just curious about 70s cinema, this film is worth sinking your fangs into. It's a blast from the past with a bite that lingers. Unfortunately, this would be, in my opinion, the last of the better Christopher Lee Dracula movies. What comes next is quite different. Join me next week as I wrap up these series of reviews with The Satanic Rites of Dracula. Hope to see you then.
Requiescat in pace, ultima.